All right. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about the news of the day, which is focused on the infrastructure, the federal debt limit, and budgets, excuse me, and that whole process. And have several questions that I'd like to throw out there, some issues, topics that I'd like you all to respond to and think about with me as far as how we get to this place. Seems like all the time as we run up debt with relatively little, if any, concern about the debt anymore, which is one of the topics I'll mention or I'm raising now. And as we think about, I'm going to start over. Need to figure out how to edit anyway. Hello, just want to touch base with you today about the news, which is focused in a lot of ways on the infrastructure debate, the federal debt limit, all those types of issues, all of which has raised some questions, again, in some cases for me as I try to think about different things and hear different comments from different folks in the news cycle, some of which are referenced in the information, in the description information for this video that you'll find with links to a couple of interviews and some commentaries and some documents as I'm trying to pull information together to think more clearly about what it is that's being debated, the implications, the why we should or why we shouldn't do some of the things that are being called for. But one of the things that strikes me is whether or not the numbers have grown so large that it's hard for us to really conceptualize what it is we're talking about. And I heard this alluded to the other day in a comment on a video that I was watching. But I mean, now we're talking about $1 trillion as if they are $100. And I even saw a quick headline yesterday about the government, the Treasury, I guess, minting a $1 trillion platinum coin and depositing that. Now, how that works, how that would work, why that would or wouldn't work, I have no idea. I'm not an economist, but it doesn't make any sense at all to me that they could mint a coin which would have a finite amount of value as a platinum coin, as a a certain weight of platinum, and then just say there's $1 trillion and now we've got $1 trillion in the bank. It seems like we're playing fast and loose with the whole concept of the faith and trust of America, and going further and further out on a limb with respect to what are the reasonable things that we can do as a country, among a nation of countries, with our finances, with our economic system, which is currently being challenged in a way that it's never been challenged before. So when we talk about these things, though, are the numbers getting so large that we really are no longer worried about actually paying the debt? We just need to, on paper, be able to suggest we're going to pay the debt, or that there are limits proposed, not ever realized, with respect to what's going to be collected, what's going to be spent, et cetera, as it seems like both sides of the political aisle have abandoned any sense of striving for a balanced budget, which used to be one of the, for lack of a better term, clarion calls or a platform position for the Republicans. But I would suggest that from George Bush proposing that we abandon capitalism to save capitalism going forward, if not before, at least from that point forward, Republicans have done as much ultimately to undermine any confidence in or any attempt to balance a budget to keep spending in check relative to receipts as the Democrats, and the degree to which Republicans have occasionally acted like they cared, their failure to consistently insist on and then follow policies that reflect an insistence on balancing the budget and living within our means, so to speak, has at best, or I should say at worst, made it more difficult to raise the alarm when Democrats make proposals that, by traditional standards, seem or go in excess of. The point being that both parties are now guilty of making proposals that go in excess of the receipts when it comes to spending. And one of the topics we can talk about is the degree to which we had to or we needed to, whether you're talking about the pandemic or defense spending or anything else. But why have we walked away from the basic idea of you don't spend more than you bring in? And if you do, paying that off ASAP as soon as possible is part of the next budgeting cycle's issue. And, one of the things I talk about, over the next 10 years, I gave up listening to over the next 10 years a long time ago because it seems like whatever's going to be spent, those doors are going to be opened and never shut. And whatever's going to be collected to offset that spending is never, at least fully, going to be realized. Now, this year, as I recall, we were told that the initial infrastructure plan would be paid for in full. And then, we're short about $300 billion, as I recall. Now we're being told that this $3.5 trillion that's being debated, plus or minus, is going to be paid for with collection policies, taxing policies, et cetera, that are being implemented. And so we keep being promised all this stuff, and yet the federal deficit continues to grow, so that the latest issue today is raising the debt limit. And the debate about whether or not it should be a bipartisan effort, the Republicans saying they're not going to, the president coming out and trying to shame the Republicans. And then a little bit later, I saw a video with Mitch McConnell quoting the president from several years ago when the president was a senator, saying that he couldn't, as a Democrat, support the reckless spending. And so all the Democrats refused to support raising the debt limit. And then the Republicans, I think it was 2006, had to do it on their own. So the point being that our whole budgeting process seems to be a mess. And as we consider when we make these plans, 10-year plan, 5-year plan, whatever, do those plans really mean anything other than this is what we need to say to get things passed at the moment? I was reading a document that's referenced in there in the description for this video, where the CRTs, and the effort to continue to fund the government and to set up a budget where over the next 10 years or whatever, we'll collect this money from this area to apply to the spending we've proposed. Well, every year, the new budget overwrites those previous rules and laws and budgets, so that nothing really ever pans out the way they say it will. Whether they say 5 years, 10 years, it ultimately doesn't matter. And in one of the interviews that's referenced there, Representative Ocasio-Cortez is being interviewed, and she makes reference to the fact that you have funny accounting in Washington, so that however you try to frame it, whether it's a tax cut or increased spending or whatever based on what's done, you can make it look like decreased expenditure or an increased revenue stream. And as she put it, in the end, the same result is going to happen. The same result will be felt by the people, and it's looking increasingly like it's going to ultimately be a negative thing. But that's part of what I want you all to jump in, make comments on, suggest how we can look at what's really happening relative to what we're being told. And so what are the real issues that need to be addressed? If they have ways to raise revenue to pay for new spending, why haven't they already increased the revenue to pay for the spending we've been doing, rather than letting us continue to go into debt? So that if we paid off the debt, cut taxes, kept the inflation down, then people wouldn't need a safety net. They'd be able to work. So if spending is going up. Why are we not addressing the reason for? What areas should the federal government be spending money on, and what areas should the government not have anything to do with? That the economy itself will address those issues that the government purports to address, if in fact people are willing to go to work. As I recall, um, one of the arguments initially for this infrastructure was it was necessary in response to the pandemic. I don't hear anybody talking about that anymore. All I hear is we need to fundamentally transform and provide the safety net, et cetera, et cetera. We have more job openings than we have people looking for work, and so there's a imbalance there that doesn't not make any sense to me. Argument has been made, well, they're bad jobs, bad pay, et cetera, et cetera. Well, why or when did we make the transition from entry level work, minimum wage work, being a job training opportunity, basically, so that you can learn work skills and develop a reputation as a worker to move on to something else? When did it transform from that to minimum wage entry level work was supposed to be funding life? The whole idea of minimum wage work, of entry level work, was to teach individuals the skills they needed to be a better worker, to perhaps become an entrepreneur and start their own business. But I remember when the first person that I knew of took a job, and it was an entry level job, and that was all she ever planned to do. There was no desire, no motivation to move forward and change her circumstances, her economic options, other than what that entry level job was going to offer for the next 20, 30 years. And so when did it become incumbent upon this idea of a living wage being something that is provided by an employer rather than something that an employee sought? And when I say employee, I'm not just talking about blue collar workers and such. I'm talking about employees being people who own their own businesses, who are the upper echelons of management in the Fortune 500 companies. Whatever the work is that you do, the entry level positions were supposed to be just that, entry level positions. And it should be clear that somebody who's making $15 an hour or $7 an hour, somebody who's making $7 an hour is going to only have half the opportunities at best of somebody making $14 an hour, compared to somebody making $28 an hour, compared to somebody making $1,000 an hour. So we need to rethink what it is that we expect out of our jobs, the basis for those payments, and whose responsibility it is to make more money if more money is needed. Whose responsibility it is to make sure that you have, as much as you can determine, the funds that you need for what you're trying to do before you commit yourself to doing something, whether that's raising a family or whatever. And I'm not talking about circumstances such as medical conditions or whatever outside circumstances make it difficult, if not impossible, for somebody to find work or to find work that will fully fund all that is needed. But we need to quit letting the exceptions make the rules, and we need to find other ways to address the exceptions, which historically has been family, community, etc., so that the government isn't there to bail out bad choices and try to ensure that everybody can have the minimum standard of living, whatever that might be, irrespective of the choices, but that everybody, in fact, has an opportunity. And so if there are opportunities that aren't available because of the system, that needs to be addressed, but not people failing to work within the system to maximize their own opportunities and to maximize the results of their efforts in the context of the broader social structure, economic structure that we have. And just a couple more quick notes as I'm going a little bit longer than I wanted to. Has the government grown so much over the last 75 years, and that we need to fundamentally, rethink how we govern, how we allocate responsibility and power, rather than simply letting power accrue because the government is going to take things over, whether or not it should or is in the best position to do so. So that we need to rethink things with respect to how, in fact, we're structured as a society, as a nation, as governmental entities. And then also, can we just quit worrying about passing things and proposing things and approving things for specific groups in society, whether it's the middle class, the upper class, the lower class? We just need to have a system in which anybody who wishes to work has an opportunity to work and succeed, and anybody who doesn't won't, recognizing that sometimes we're going to make it and sometimes we're not because of our own choices, our own action or inaction, and sometimes it'll be because of circumstances outside of our control, but it avoids the government trying to pick or adjudicate differences of results when in fact there are many factors that go into determining how successful anybody is relative to somebody else, and even what the definition of success is. We may be trying to fix problems that don't actually exist because people are living in the circumstances that, for whatever reason, they've chosen, even if to us it may not look like the best of circumstances or the best result, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there's a few things in there that I hope you'll have a minute to respond to, point me to resources and that I can look at to try to think more clearly about these topics, and ask you to also comment. How do we determine what it is that we ought to be doing, and then what's the best way to get that done? Because it seems to me that a lot of what we're doing now is wasting time and energy as opposed to actually working towards solutions and actually identifying what it is we should be solving. So that sometimes we create debates where there were no debates and we haven't even agreed on what it is we should be debating. Thank you all very much. I'll catch you later. Bye bye.